Welcome in, everyone. You're listening to Bulls Central here. I'm joined with me by a very special guest. He's the voice of the Bulls HQ podcast and a longtime Bulls fan all the way from Australia. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Mark K. Mark, it's great to have you on the show and appreciate you making the time, man.
No, thank you for having me on the show, mate. It's definitely a privilege. So I appreciate you having me on.
Of course. Now, Mark, I discovered the Bulls HQ podcast just a few months ago, actually, which, by the way, for those, if you have not checked out Bulls HQ podcast, you absolutely should. I will leave a link to it in the description. You should also follow Mark on Twitter at Mark K Hoops. But anyway, Mark, I'm a fairly new subscriber. And after listening to you guys for a few episodes, I thought, okay, I've got to get this guy on my channel because I love having other creators, other like-minded Bulls fans on the channel. And, I'll get to the Bulls, how the season is going so far. We'll talk about the recent games, more specifically last night's win against the Cavs, as well as the game coming up tomorrow against the Bucks. But first and foremost, I'm curious to know, how did you become a Bulls fan living all the way in Australia? What drove you to this franchise? And then what made you want to take it to the next level and start pursuing a podcast and everything else that relates to the team?
Yeah, so look, like most kids, I think growing up from afar or abroad in a different country during the 90s, like I'm just a typical bandwagon fan, to be honest with you. So Michael Jordan popularized the game from a global sense. And, at a time when I was growing up, he was the main figure. The Bulls were the main team. They were a global team, and it still are a global team. But it was the dominance of Jordan and what he meant from a branding point of view for the Chicago Bulls. And me growing up in Australia as a kid, coming into the basketball space more generally, you sort of gravitated towards Jordan at that point. So that's how I sort of discovered the Bulls. I wouldn't say I was a diehard fan during that era, just because it was hard to get Bulls games from abroad during that period. It got a lot easier once the internet got going, I suppose. But that didn't really start up until like the early 2000s, I suppose. So that's when I really dived into the whole Bulls being a diehard fan type thing in the early 2000s. But it was probably the first, probably the baby Bulls team, I would say. When the Bulls sort of started moving on from the Krause era into that John Paxson era, where they sort of brought through Kirk Heinrich, that was when it all really started for me, I would say, in terms of just crazy fanaticism. So that's probably where it started for me. And in terms of why I podcast, why I like banging on about the Bulls so much is because I am so in terms of distance, so far away from the action. For me, getting online and being online with people and talking about the Bulls, that's where I find other people who have similar interests to me, I suppose. And obviously the Bulls being that main interest to me. And I guess I'm just an opinionated person as well. So I just like speaking about the Bulls. So it just, whether it was chatting on forums, getting on Twitter, blogging about the Bulls, and naturally then progressing into podcasting, just sort of stem from there. But I just like talking basketball, like talking about the Bulls. And with so many Bulls fans being in the US, it just made sense for me to podcast so I could connect with people, basically.
Yeah. So there's actually a decent following in Australia, right? And not even just a Bulls following, but people are pretty into the NBA there, from what I understand. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's sort of caught on in the last 5, maybe 10 years, I would say. But it's certainly not like in the US where you can basically talk to anyone and they're an NBA fan.
Right.
It is somewhat of a bit of a niche topic still, but most certainly it's a growing sport in Australia. In terms of basketball, it's the main thing people watch, more so than the local league. But having said that, not everyone's a basketball fan. So it's not like at work you can just talk to, the random guy you see at the kitchen counter sort of thing and just talk basketball. So hence why I'm online all the time.
Absolutely. No, I love it. So let's talk about this season so far. Obviously, the Bulls had been kind of slumping a bit. They had the 4-game losing streak, which isn't ideal, but they were also, able to snap that streak last night in a much needed win. They're also incredibly depleted, which I know you've talked about a lot. But even that losing streak aside, this has obviously been, for a long time Bulls fan, one of the best teams that we've seen in years. What has been the biggest surprise for you so far this season, now that we're a little over halfway through the year?
Certainly DeMar DeRozan's season. I was not expecting this. I don't think most people were expecting this. So the only people that I imagine were expecting this level of play was maybe DeMar DeRozan and the true diehards, I guess, that are like to project everything at its peak value, I suppose. But yeah, I was not expecting DeMar DeRozan at age 32 to be having his best season by a long shot. So I was expecting DeMar to come to Chicago and being the DeMar that we saw in San Antonio, like a very good player, borderline all-star type player, but to be at a point where he's playing at an all NBA level, like that was completely unforeseen for me. The way the team came together so quickly, like again, that was not something I was expecting. If you think back to like the first Tibbs season, it took, a month or so for that team to really come together. I was expecting that to be the case here, where maybe towards the end of the season, this team would be really gelling and would be one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference, but they've done the complete opposite in the sense that they've basically from the jump just started amazingly well. So like there has been no assimilation period at all for this team. They sort of just got it together and got rolling just from the jump. So they're probably been the two biggest surprises for me, as well as maybe from a negative point of view, Vooch being in the slump that he has been. He comes in and out of it, I suppose, but right. He has been better over the last 20 games compared to the first 20 games. But I wasn't necessarily expecting him, struggling as much as he has. And maybe the last one is Io. I did not expect him to be this influential in terms of the rotation this soon into his career. Like the level he's playing at the moment was, if I was projecting ahead at absolute peak value, like I thought maybe he could do this in like year 3 or 4 or something like that when he's in his prime. But to be doing what he's doing at rookie right now is, for me at least, completely unforeseen. So, yeah, a lot more positive than negative for the Bulls at the moment, which is obviously reflected in their in their standings.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about DeMar DeRozan. That was the biggest thing for me. I'll admit, I was a bit hesitant about the DeRozan signing, and I talked about it on my channel. Not hesitant in the sense that, I don't think DeRozan is the right player or the right fit. I never really questioned the fit with Zach Lavine. It was more so, was it a bit too much for him? Like we gave him a pretty sizable contract. Like you said, forget it's 32. And we had to trade a decent amount for him. Not easy, but, it was a first round pick, and obviously it's in the future. I was a bit wary of that, right? And so that completely threw me off, seeing him play at an almost MVP type level. No one was expecting that, right? No. I was another big one too. I mean, the headline was great because he was a Chicago kid, a second round pick. And I knew that he was going to be better than a second round pick, would typically go for. But the way that he's shown up right now, being in the starting lineup, which we'll get to, is incredible. And just the poise and the maturity that he's shown so far, for me, those have been the two biggest surprises by far. Now, obviously, we just learned the news earlier this morning that Lonzo Ball is going to undergo surgery to repair small meniscus tear, which will sideline him for 6 to 8 weeks. A big blow when you think about the team chemistry that they've been able to develop that you touched on. You've had guys in and out of the roster, whether it be through COVID protocols, injuries. Obviously, they're going to miss Lonzo's defense, his ability to work in transition, spread the floor with his outside shooting. How do you think the Bulls are going to fare over these next 2 months or so without Lonzo?
Yeah, it's a tough one, to be honest with you. I'm glad that Caruso is back now. That's the timing of that helps, I suppose. To your point earlier, like the fact that Io is playing so really well, like that helps, and even Coby as well. The guard rotation has been really fruitful for this team, and I guess the issue here is, obviously Lonzo is out, but he's not the only guy out. So I think they can survive Lonzo being out, but in terms of, Zach being out, Javonte, Derek Jones Jr., Patrick Williams, obviously, like there's 5 legit rotation guys that are out of the team at the moment. So it's probably my concern is less about Lonzo being out and just when they can get at least 2 or 3 of those guys back. Like hopefully Javonte is maybe a week or 2 away. There was some news earlier today as well that Zach may be able to play. I think Sharania reported that maybe he could go next Wednesday, I think, against the Raptors. Yeah. So, I mean, if Zach can come back in, 5 to 7 days, if Javonte is maybe a week or so back, and, you can get a couple guys back, and like I said, Caruso's back now, maybe that can help stem the loss of Lonzo, as well as obviously Io continue doing what he's doing. But it does hurt this team, and for whatever reason, they're running through a patch now where they're getting injuries. I mean, initially it was the whole COVID thing that derailed the team, but they still found a way to keep things together through DeMar's incredible shot making. But now it's the injuries that are, for whatever reason, piling up at this point. And it's probably a good thing. I guess the perspective I'm trying to apply is that it's good that they're happening now, and it's good that they're not super serious injuries. Yes, they're between
Right.
2 to 4 weeks, or 4 to 6, or 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the injury. But they're not season enders, at least. Like even Patrick Williams, he may come back, sort of thing. So I'm just trying to look at the positives here. But it obviously sucks that we're running into this. But look, so a lot of teams. I mean, the Nets are going to be without Kevin Durant for 4 to 6 weeks as well. So we're not the only team dealing with these sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you look at it that way, right, it's like, well, the guys were getting pretty tired, right? I mean, it's just from a fatigue standpoint, it's unfortunate, but now you have, like you said, 5 solid rotational players that are going to get some rest in the middle of a season, going into towards the end of the season, obviously going into the playoffs. It's going to be helpful. Now, one of the things I like about your podcast, as well as just your general Twitter feed, is you don't shy away from how you feel about this team, good or bad, which I like, right? You're going to tell it like it is. We've got the trade deadline coming around the corner. I guess it's about 3 weeks away or so. I'll get to some of the potential trade rumors, proposals that we've been seeing fly around. I know you've talked about some, but before we get into that, what do you think the Bulls need to focus on? One of the most, really their biggest area of improvement that needs to be addressed prior to the deadline?
Yeah, I mean, to me, they basically need a realized version of Patrick Williams in terms of what his peak version is. Now, that can come through Patrick Williams, or that can come through someone who is like Patrick Williams, who's maybe 3, 4, 5 years into his career and is more established and is more of a certainty. But that's effectively the player they need, a 6'8" to 6'10" wing who can play 3, who can play 4, hell, maybe even play some 5 sort of thing, that can defend the best wing scorer on the opposing team, as well as, being maybe at least a catch and shoot option offensively from 3-point line, if not, a little bit of playmaking here and there. But like that's their main need. They've got their 2 great isolation scorers. They've got the 2, really, quality perimeter defenders in Lonzo and Caruso. Io and Coby have been fantastic as role guys, as have, Javonte and Derek Jones Jr. Like even Troy Brown Jr. like occasionally bobs up and has a decent game. Tony Bradley as well can be a little bit maligned at times, but like he can have a nice game. I've liked what I've seen from Tyler Cook. So like they've got like a lot of role guys in places where you want them to be. And, I mentioned Vuce before, but when he's on, like he's a perfect third option. So it kind of feels like the only thing they are missing is Patrick Williams, like I said, but not necessarily the Patrick Williams that we saw in the first 5 games of the season, but like a guy who could average 13 or so points per game, get 5 or so rebounds, a couple of assists, play really good defense, shoot the 3 ball at 38% on good volume. That's ultimately what they need from their 4 position. So, I mean, we as a fan base are constantly arguing about whether that's Patrick Williams or whether that's someone else via the trade deadline. I don't know what the answer to that is. Like I have my opinion about it, but I could be completely wrong, to be honest with you. But that's pretty much what they need. That's the main key component that they need, because they've seemingly got everything else at the moment. So I'm hoping it comes together when they're in the playoffs, that they have that guy. Like I said, whether it's Pat or whether it's someone they acquire at the deadline. But that's the main missing ingredient at the moment.
Well, so that was going to be my question. Who do you think that would be? If it's not Patrick Williams,
yeah.
Who do you think in an ideal world that would be?
In an ideal world, for me, it would be OG Anunoby, but that doesn't seem
maybe more realistic.
Yeah. But like he would be absolutely. He's in my mind's eye, like he's the perfect guy, and if Patrick Williams could develop into an OG type player, like that would be fantastic. But the trouble with the Bulls, like their timelines are sort of merging, or not necessarily merging at the right time. Like had Patrick been in year 3 and 4 and was maybe doing the things that OG is doing now, then I'd be more inclined to say keep Pat. But because Pat's in his 2nd year and potentially missing the entire season, and who the hell knows if you're going to get this type of performance from DeMar next season, Vuce will be a year older. I mean, what does the team look like next season? Are they going to be better next season? I would guess not. Just by the chance that I didn't expect them to be this good this season.
Right.
And you would have to assume they'll slowly decline at some point. So, I guess if it can't be someone like OG, then I guess the name that everyone keeps discussing is Jeremy Grant, because he's a similar type player. Harrison Barnes, again, a similar type player. To me, they're probably a tier below someone like an OG, or even a Siakam. I guess that's another name that a lot of fans like to throw out there. But those two guys from the Raptors don't seem like realistic options. So it comes back to guys like Jeremy Grant and Harrison Barnes. And, you know, if they're the best names available, then you just have to do the calculus as to whether it's worth the risk, whether the risk is worth the reward, I suppose. So,
Right.
I go back and forth on it every day. And, you know, if for whatever reason Jeremy Grant doesn't want to be a Bull because he wants a greater role and doesn't want to be a role guy, then maybe I'm not interested in Jeremy Grant. So there's so many things that we don't know from our perspective or from our viewpoint, I suppose. So we got to trust AK to make the right decision. But yeah, look, I'd love an OG, but if it can't be an OG, then a Harrison Barnes or Jeremy Grant, depending on the cost.
There's one guy you didn't mention that you did put a trade proposal together, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that. I think it was let me see. I had it written down here. So I mean, obviously we're talking about guys like Jeremy Grant, Harrison Barnes, even Miles Turner. Some people talk about. Some people, you know, you hear Christian Wood from time to time. But I think in your trade proposal, so it was a trade with the Hawks for Derrick Jones Jr., Troy Brown Jr., Patrick Williams, the first round pick from Portland, for John Collins and Sharif Cooper. Yeah. Talk to me more about this one, because I actually find this intriguing, and then I'll share my thoughts. But kind of talk to me how you kind of arrived at this one, and what do you think the benefit here would be?
So for me, the logic was, so I started thinking about like alternatives to Jeremy Grant after it was reported that he wants to go to a situation where he's a focal point offensively and he's one of the main guys. And that was a report. Who knows if there's any room, credibility to it at all. But if that is the case, if that's what Jeremy Grant wants, which he's completely entitled to, then I started thinking about other options. And we've talked about a Harrison Barnes for months and months at this point. So I started just thinking about different guys. And John Collins is maybe available with the Hawks. Like, his name is seemingly always in trade rumors. That was the case last season. It may be the case this season. But he's just a different type of player, not necessarily the guy that's going to guard, a Kevin Durant or anything like that. But in terms of, more of a three, instead of getting a 3-4, getting more of a 4-5. I like what John Collins can do as a small ball center type thing. If you want to really go small, and rather than getting that 3-4 guy to put on Kevin Durant, then maybe you put Caruso on a Durant, you put Lonzo on a Harden, Lavine on Kyrie Irving as an example, and then you have John Collins as your center in a small ball sort of arrangement there. So I've just always liked John Collins, to be honest with you. And the reason why I like John Collins is because, to me, he is everything that I hoped Larry Markkinen would be. Someone that can, get you 17 to 20 points per game, shoots the three ball at a really high clip on good volume. Is improving as a defensive player, is improving as a passer, can dunk the hell out of the ball. If we think about, Lonzo, who we're missing at the moment, but I'm just thinking about like the Lonzo pick and roll with John Collins and some of the alley-oops that he could throw, or if you're running breaks with Lonzo and John Collins and Zach Lavine, like that would be pretty damn sick. So it was just a different name, I suppose, a different type of player, someone who could start at power forward next to Vooch, or when Vooch is off the floor, you can play him at center. And there may be matchups in the playoffs where it doesn't make sense to put Vooch out there. So what are you going to do? Are you going to go super small? Are you going to put Tony Bradley out there? What are the Bulls going to do? So I don't know. It's just a different option for us to consider. I don't expect it, but it was just me pieing this guy, riffing on some ideas.
First of all, I like it. Don't let C Red Fred give you a hard time for it. I thought it was great. I mean, probably not realistic, right? Obviously John Collins, he kind of has been in trade rumors really throughout his time with the Hawks, right? Even after they just signed him to a big deal. And I think a lot of it is just because the Hawks have disappointed so far this year, right? So they're just trying to, what are we going to do, right? We went to the Eastern Conference Finals last year, and here we are. We're looking at they're like 12th place, like 7 games below 500. I don't know, crazy. But that's an intriguing one, because John Collins, I do think, actually would almost be a better fit than a Jeremy Grant. And the reason I say that is because, I mean, Jeremy Grant, obviously, he's older, he's got more experience, and there is about better overall score. But John Collins just has more of that like tenacity and like the strength and just a better post and interior presence than someone like Jeremy Grant, that I actually think would be a great fit. I personally don't want to give up on Patrick Williams. I'm not one of those fans that's like, no, Patrick Williams is untouchable, right? I know there's a lot of Bulls fans out there that say like, we're never going to give up Pat. There's always a price for someone, right? And you have to consider the fact that he's probably a pretty valuable trade asset. You were talking about the timeline earlier, right? It's like DeRozan's going to get older, Vucevic is going to get older, even same with Lavine. You got to think about how quickly you can potentially, what's the, championship window for this team. Then you have to consider trading some of these younger guys. But I personally wouldn't want to get rid of Patrick. One other one that I saw, this wasn't from you, but I'm just curious to get your thoughts the other day. When it also involves Patrick Williams, but it's Bulls first round pick from Portland, Nikola Vucevic for Rudy Gobert. What do you think about that one?
Wow. I'll have to digest that one. I mean,
it's a lot to take in. Huh?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one. So Pat, Vooch, and a first rounder for Gobert.
Yeah, the Portland first rounder. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I would do that, to be honest. I mean, like you would be amazing defensively,
right?
Obviously because of Gobert, but I don't know about Gobert's contract. I mean, he's on a huge contract. I don't know how well he's going to age out just due to the fact that he's primarily a defensive big, doesn't have a ton of offensive versatility, let's say. And we've seen him, and it hasn't necessarily been just his fault, but like he's been played off the floor in deep in playoffs or deep in playoff runs, or if he hasn't been playing off the floor, he stayed on there and has been exposed some just because he's mainly a drop defense big. And, Bulls fans, for whatever reason, hate the drop defense already. They're just going to get a whole lot more drop defense with Rudy Gobert. It would completely change the dynamic of the team. Like you would become a top 3 defense, and the Bulls have scope to be a top 10 defense anyway, but maybe they would value being a top 3, top 5 defense. But offensively, it would completely change what you would do in the sense that you lose that shooting option that Vooch does provide from center. You lose his passing ability that he has from the high post, which really connects the floor all over the court. Whether it's moving the ball from one side to the next or getting the ball high low, whatever it may be. Like Vooch does a lot of things that are underrated by this fan base, offensively at least. And it's an interesting one. I probably wouldn't do it just because I'd be too scared of Gobert's contract. Maybe if he had like 2 or 3 years remaining on his deal, but if I'm not mistaken, there's like 4 or something years on that deal at a huge amount, and that would scare me, I would say.
Yeah, I'm with you actually. So the reason I brought up these two, the one you have for John Collins and Rudy Gobert, is because those are the names you're not really hearing, right? I wanted to stay away from the typical ones that we're always hearing about, but I'm with you on Rudy Gobert. Obviously an amazing defensive piece that could be added to the team, but I feel like you're giving up a little bit too much, and that contract of his, that's I don't know, that would be the biggest thing for me to swallow. You also have to factor in, Zach Lavine potentially getting a max contract next season. And as much as, Bulls fans hate Vucevic right now, maybe with the exception of last game, he's still a good player. He just hasn't been consistent. And you want to see him turn into the Vucevic that we saw last year. But you also have to understand that he's on a team where he's a third option when he was the number 1 option on an Orlando team, a bad team. Obviously it's going to be a bit of an adjustment for him. So anyway, I'm with you on that. I think I would pass on that trade, even though it does sound intriguing. Now I don't want to just talk about this whole session on trades, but because we're doing the trade deadline, I did want to ask one more topic, more so on Patrick Williams, because suddenly there's this sort of out of sight, out of mind mentality from Bulls fans that, Patrick Williams, where people are slowly coming around to this idea of trading him. I was just talking about that. Whereas before he was always considered to be untouchable. He's going to be the next Kawhi Leonard. And it would be a huge mistake to trade him. And people were talking about trading Coby White, right? Because he didn't start out the season all that well once he finally returned him because the Bulls were already crowded in the backcourt. I have to ask, who would you rather trade if you had to choose between Patrick or Coby? Maybe it's neither of them, and that's fine. But if you had to choose between the two, who would you want to trade?
It would be Pat for a number of reasons. I think at the moment, this team really needs Coby White scoring off the bench. Io's been fantastic, as we sort of talked about before, but, where he can go missing at times is with his own offense. He certainly has games where he's, fantastic offensively, but he's not as consistent offensively as he is defensively, where he's just been just amazing as a rookie, to be fair. Like the way he plays defense for someone of his age is just, out of this world. But I think this Bulls team really needs Coby scoring, and the way he can sort of offset what Caruso and Io bring, I think is really valuable. But, further to that as well, what else is driving my thinking here is the fact that Pat probably carries more value as from a trade sense. So whilst if we're assuming that Pat's potential is greater than Coby's, I would say most people would assume that's the case, then we can assume most teams, around the league would feel similarly as well. So he's probably going to return more value than what Coby can. And because you're getting production from Coby right now, whereas you're not getting anything from Patrick, it just makes more sense to move on from Patrick Williams, particularly if you are trading for a similar player who can do, like we said, what we hope to expect that Pat can do in year 3, 4, or 5. Whereas, if you were to deal Pat for a player like Coby, like that would make sense. Whereas if you're dealing Pat for a 3-4 type hybrid, then that would be nice. But yeah, look, credit to Coby White. He's maybe played himself out of a position where he was maybe talked about as a guy that you include in a Patrick Williams deal.
Right.
But right now, the way Coby is playing, the importance of his role, and the fact that this Bulls team doesn't have a lot of scoring from the bench, doesn't have a lot of shooting from the bench. Like, these are things that Coby's providing. So I think he has a necessary role on this team. So I would actually keep Coby, which is kind of ironic given my position on Coby maybe in years past. But I think he's really important to this team right now, and I think Patrick will just get you more via a trade.
Well, especially right now too, Ryan, with Lonzo Ball being out, you're definitely going to need
exactly.
Coby.
Yeah.
Although at the same time, because Coby's been playing so well, maybe his trade value has actually exceeded Patrick's. I don't know. But enough about trades. Let's talk about the Bulls game last night. So the Bulls snapped 4-game losing streak against the Cavs. Sounds weird to say a good team against the Cavs, a good Cavs team, I guess I should say. But the Bulls beat the Cavs 117-104 without Zach Lavine, without Lonzo, without Javonte Green, or Derek Jones Jr. This is a big win for the Bulls because they did all this while being shorthanded. And really, for the first time, in my view anyway, in 4 games, we saw a different level of energy and a sense of urgency that we saw from the Bulls, like we used to see at the start of the season anyway. That was the biggest bright spot in the game to me, was finally seeing the guys playing with effort and having fun again. What was your biggest takeaway from last night's game?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I was concerned going into this game. Like, as you mentioned, the Cavs are really good. That they lead the Eastern Conference in net rating. They're like 4th in the NBA in net rating. And maybe people haven't realized how good the Cavs are, but like they're damn good. And they potentially will be a top 4 team in the East, if not top 4, then at least top 6. Yeah. And they're doing this with so many injuries themselves. So they deserve credit. But what I was actually fearful of was their size, and the Bulls' limited size at the moment, particularly with all these injuries. So I was expecting to lose last night. I thought they were going to get dominated on the glass, dominated on defense, because the Cavs are a really good defensive team. But that didn't happen, and I don't know whether it's just pure luck or pure circumstance with Alex Caruso being back. But this team, they played with an energy, as you sort of spoke about, that they haven't necessarily been playing with over the last 5 to 6 games. We saw a bit of it against the Celtics, where they did play a really good game, and that was an unfortunate loss, a game they could have won, and one where they were playing super hard. But if you're thinking about the Nets game, the Warriors game, even against the Grizzlies, that like the Bulls didn't really seem like they were engaged at all. But for whatever reason, against the Cavs, like I said, maybe it was because Caruso was back, or again, it was just circumstance. But you just love the effort, I suppose. And you can deal with the team losing a game if they play the right way. Like against the Celtics, it would have been nice to see Vuce make that 3, but at the same time, like, it's like, okay, well, I got my money's worth in terms of what I saw. The team tried, every player tried, and they put their best performance out there. And that was the same thing they did against the Cavs. The only difference here is they maintained their performance and won pretty convincingly in the end. So really fun game. It's always fun to beat the Cavs, always fun to beat Lauri Markkanen. But at the same time, I am fearful about this Cavs team, in the next 3 to 5 years. They've got a nice young nucleus there. So, it's going to be interesting to see how they develop.
Yeah, well, Markkanen had a good game last night, right? He showed out pretty well at the United Center.
Yeah, I've lost a lot of Finnish followers over the last 6 to 12 months, which isn't surprising given my Lowry marketing takes. But yeah, there was a few people reminding me that Lowry is obviously an ex-Bull who's playing well, let's say. But look, he hasn't had a good season, but he had a good game. So
Yeah.
Congratulations to Lowry.
Yeah. So the Bulls, big game tomorrow night. We've got the Bucks coming up. Giannis, obviously the Bulls are still going to be shorthanded. No Zach Lavine, according to Billy Donovan anyway. And like you said, it sounds like he's going to be out until Wednesday. I haven't heard any updates on Javonte Green. I actually thought he was going to be coming back a little bit sooner, but I guess not. What are you expecting for tomorrow's game? And if the Bulls can play as well as they did last night, do you think they have a shot at winning?
Well, look, if I'm not mistaken, I believe this is a nationally televised game. I think it's on ESPN.
It is.
Yep. Yeah, and we've seen over the last week or 2 weeks that every time the Bulls have been on national TV, it has not gone well. So in that sense, given that they're playing the Bucks, given that they're on national TV, I'm not expecting a good outcome. But and look, beyond the superficial things like being on TV or whatever it may be, like, without Zach, it hurts. But the fact that, Giannis is Giannis and the Bulls seemingly have zero answer for Giannis, not to say that any real team has an answer for Giannis, but like for the way the Bulls at the moment are set up, they don't really have a credible option for Giannis. I mean, it's unfortunate that Ryan Arcidiacono just signed a 10-day deal with the New York Knicks. I mean, that's who Jim Boylan would have put on Giannis, but that's not an option at the most anymore. So maybe it's Caruso that guards Giannis. Who the hell knows? But yeah, I'm just fearful of the Giannis matchup, to be honest with you. Like in terms of all teams in the Eastern Conference, the Bucks scare me the most, more so than the Nets, the Heat, the Sixers, whoever it may be. Giannis is just that dominant and that frightful for me, and there's just no real good option for the Bulls. So yeah, I think this is unfortunately going to be a big loss, but not unexpected.
I'm 100% with you as far as like who scares me the most in the East. It's by far the Bucks. Everyone talks about the Nets, but the Bulls showed that they beat the Nets twice. I know they had a really, really bad game against them, when Kyrie was playing. And then obviously the narrative now is, well, Kyrie wasn't in the lineup. And it's like, Kyrie didn't even play that well. It was just a bad game. Yeah. Kevin Durant went off because we had Alfonso McKinney guarding him, right? But the Bucks do. They by far scare me the most. They're defending champs. And it's mainly because of Giannis. And I'm actually really curious to see who they're even going to put, like you said, Alex Caruso. Is that like our best option to put on Giannis? I mean, I guess McKinney will probably guard him a bit here and there. And it goes back to the Bulls really need to address this issue that they have at the power forward spot. But it is funny, though. I think you actually called this out as well. People are like, well, I'm really worried about the Bulls, being able to guard Giannis. That's going to apply to any team, right? Yeah, it's just you have to at least try to get someone that can more or less match, his intensity and his ability to score on offense. And the Bulls just don't have that right now, right? But no matter who you have, Giannis is always going to be a problem. That's not going to change. But
yeah, exactly. And look, the best Giannis stopper might be the Brooklyn Nets, and what I mean by that is the Bulls. It would be really critical for the Bulls to get the first seed in the East. That way, you could hopefully avoid the Nets and the Bucks until you get to the Eastern Conference Finals, assuming that happens, and then just let those two teams take each other out. And that way you don't have to play both. Yeah. And whether Giannis and the Bucks prevail, then obviously you play him, or whether it's KD and the Nets, you play him. But hopefully they play each other. They take one of each other out, like they did last year in the playoffs. And obviously the Hawks only had to play one of those teams. That's the best case scenario for the Bulls. But ultimately, whether it's Durant or whether it's a Giannis, emerging, there is no reasonable or feasible option against those guys. Yeah. So it's, what are you doing to limit the other four guys on the court? And I think that's where potentially the Bulls can win, or hope they win. And obviously, a little bit of luck here and there would be hopeful as well. Maybe Giannis has a really bad series, just can't get his shot going, or maybe, one of Middleton or Holiday, for whatever reason, is out injured or something like that. I'm under no illusions that the Bulls need some luck. And, I'm hoping that would be the case in the same way that the Hawks got lucky last season. The Suns got lucky. The Bucks got lucky last season. So you're always hoping for that playoff luck. The Bulls will never be favorites against teams like the Bucks or the Nets, but that isn't to say they can't win a title this season.
Yeah. Do you think that it's realistic for the Bulls to get the number one seed, given everything that's going on right now? Lonzo Ball getting injured, he's going to be out for 2 months. Do you think that can happen?
Yeah, look, this is the thing. prior to maybe 2 weeks ago, I would have said yes, definitely 100%. That is something that can happen. But now, with all these injuries mounting, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. Like at the moment, I'm just trying to hope they can maintain a top 4 seed and get home court. Like that would be ideal. But in terms of the Eastern Conference, the gap between the first seed and the sixth seed is like a couple games, 2 or 3 games at the moment. So it can swing pretty quickly. The Sixers are starting to get it together. If they make a trade and get some real pieces back for someone who's not even playing in Ben Simmons, like they could become a real threat. We've talked about the Cavs, the Heat are getting it together as well. So like the top 6 in the East is really jumbled at the moment, to the point where, a couple of bad losses here and there, and you could go from a first or a second down to a fourth or a fifth. So that's actually why I was really critical that the Bulls got that Cavs loss, because the Bulls had, prior to that Cavs game, had lost 4 in a row. But I assumed it was going to be 5 in a row. And I think I just misspoke before and said a Cavs loss, but it ended up being a Cavs win. So or a win against the Cavs. So that was really important in terms of, just stemming the tide of them losing these games and maybe, creating some distance. But, I was going to say fortunate, but I don't want to use that word because, Kevin Durant is out injured, but the fact that he's out for 4 to 6 weeks maybe helps the Bulls maintain some ground. We don't know how some of these other teams are going to fare. Joel Embiid is always an injury risk.
Sure.
Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry, Bam, those guys might get injured. So we'll wait and see. But I'm hopeful that they can sort of maintain it through the next few weeks coming up. And at least after this Bucks game, there is some winnable games coming up. So that's certainly my hope.
I don't think I was following you at the beginning of the season, so I'm curious. What was your preseason prediction for the Bulls?
I think I don't recall in terms of exactly the win total, but I think I was saying somewhere between 43 to 45 wins.
Yeah.
And the best case scenario being a 3rd seed, and the most likely scenario being like a 5 to 7 seed, and maybe the worst case scenario being like an 8 to 10 seed. That was my thinking. I thought, a 45 or 43 to 45 win team, someone who could sneak into 6th in the East or 5th in the East, that was the most likely scenario.
Yeah.
But they're smashing those expectations at the moment. So, they're on pace for 50 plus wins. So, I'm pretty buoyant about what they can do this season based on that.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Mine was around 44 to 46. My sort of was like 5 seed was sort of the ideal of where they would land. I didn't even think 3 seed was reasonable, right? As far as like the high end of the expectations, I was like, maybe 4 seed. But yeah, it's interesting. But Mark, I'll let you go, man. I'll get you out of here. I really do appreciate the time. Appreciate all the good work you guys put into the Bulls HQ podcast. Hopefully our Bulls can get a win tomorrow night, and I'll be listening to your podcast along the way. And guys, again, be sure to check out the Bulls HQ podcast. Again, that will be linked in the description. And Mark, great having you. Let's stay in touch, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I've always loved talking Bulls, and even more so with independent creators as well. It's cool to see what you're doing. I was watching your Lonzo video just before as well, getting up to speed on the news. So keep doing what you're doing as well, and appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.